A very good morning to all of you, and let me first of all begin by welcoming everybody to the Islamic Republic of Iran, to a rainy Tehran, which doesn't happen too often. And we're happy that you brought some rain for us. I hope that this can continue while we suffer from lack of rain in Iran and have in this region for some time with disastrous environmental implications. Which incidentally is an issue that can bring us all together, because our environment in this region requires a lot of common effort by all of us to address. Let me begin by just making a few remarks. I wanted to devote most of this time to a dialogue with all of you, or at least with some. But let me just make, in the spirit of continuing what my dear friend and colleague Frank Bolter just mentioned, some thoughts about what lies ahead and the question marks that need to be addressed. I think the reason we were able to reach an agreement of historical proportions in Vienna was that we decided to have a different look at the question and at the paradigm that was basically motivating our efforts for the past many years. We can look at international relations in the old Cold War mentality of a zero-sum game. That is, any gain by the United States and the West is necessarily a loss for the rest of the world, and because some people have started or have become accustomed to calling the West as the international community, whereas we in the developing world see it otherwise. And any loss for the United States is a gain for us. And that's one way of looking at it. And that has been the prevailing way of looking at it, that there is no commonality of interest, even in small areas. And experience has proved that this was actually the case, unfortunately. That in most cases they defined their interest as hostile to the interest of the developing world, and the outcome was that that mentality prevailed, that nothing could be done. If you look at our history, it's not that bright, neither in Europe nor elsewhere. We haven't been able to resolve conflicts through negotiations. In each and every episode that we look at, we tried all the wrong options before we got to the realization that we needed to sit down at the negotiating table and try to discuss and negotiate a solution. In most cases, all the wrong options included war, unfortunately. The only difference that this nuclear case has is that it didn't include war. But it doesn't mean that we didn't try all the wrong options. We did actually. Pressure imposition on Iran continued for, 12 years, 10 years? All sorts of sanctions were imposed on Iran for 12 years, for 10 years, 8 years, some for 35 years. None of them were able to produce any result. People believe that sanctions and pressure can bring people to the negotiating table. But our German friends and our French friends and our British counterparts know better than anybody that Iran was at the negotiating table in the early 2000s. We were negotiating. So there was no need to bring Iran to the negotiating table. Actually, in 2005, the country that prevented these negotiations to reach a conclusive result is not present in this room. And thankfully, it's not even that administration is present in Washington. It's the same administration, it was the same administration whose supporters continue to try to torpedo our nuclear deal. So what is it that we need to do? And what is it that we decided to do? Iran decided that showing to the rest of the world that its nuclear program was exclusively peaceful was not necessarily a concession that we were making to the rest of the world. Although we believed that the allegations were unfounded, although we believed that the pressure on Iran was unjustified, but we did not see, we did not define for ourselves a resolution of this issue to be a concession. I believe at the same time our European friends need to understand, and they understood this so we could have an agreement, that getting rid of the sanctions is not a concession, because sanctions were not an asset to begin with. Sanctions were a liability. And that enabled us to move forward, and what enables us to even move further forward is to understand that we need to look at this as a positive-sum game, otherwise we will all lose, as we have in the last 10 or 15 years. How we can move from this starting point to address regional issues? We need to understand that this region has common problems, has common threats. Resolving these common threats and common problems is not going to be a liability for anyone. If any of our friends in the region started to believe that ISIS, Daesh, or extremism of any type or color could even be a short-term asset for them, they found, in a rather harsh way, that Daesh was no asset for nobody. And I think they have all waken up to the bitter reality that in this region and in this world, we cannot have security at the expense of insecurity of others. We cannot have prosperity at the expense of deprivation of others. And I think by bringing that home, we can in fact use the nuclear agreement to resolve the problems in this region. Some of our friends and neighbors in this region and some other actors and players saw the nuclear agreement as a threat because they believed that securitizing Iran, showing Iran as a security threat to this region was an asset for them. It helped them explain all the inexplicable policies that they have followed in this region, from the creation of Al-Qaeda to the creation of Taliban to the creation of Daesh and to other very negative implications. I just left out the part about arming Saddam Hussein to his teeth so that he could bomb Iran for 8 years, so that he could use chemical weapons in Iran for 8 years. So my question to all my friends is, who needs to get the confidence of whom? Did Iran invade any country in this region? Did Iran use chemical weapons against any country in this region? Did Iran play any role in the creation of Taliban, Al-Qaeda, Daesh, or Saddam Hussein in this region? Or were we the victim of all of it? We all need to look in the future. We should not remain prisoners of the past. But if we were to remain prisoners of the past, the Iranian people would have a lot to say. A lot to say to a lot of people in this region and in Europe. But we live in this region. We need a stable environment. We need a stable neighborhood. We do not have the luxury of continuing to securitize our neighbors where their insecurity will be our insecurity. In Iran, we believe that if Saudi Arabia is threatened, it is as if we are threatened. If there is a bombing in Saudi Arabia, as there was last night, it threatens our security. If there is a bombing in Kuwait, it threatens our security. If there is insecurity anywhere in this region, you cannot in today's world live in an unsecure environment and believe that you can be secure. We understand this, and that is why, while we cannot forget the past, we will not remain imprisoned in the past. We are willing to look forward. We are willing to look forward to resolve these issues. We believe that all these problems in our region have a solution, provided that we don't look at it in zero-sum games. Unfortunately, what has happened in our region is that some of the players in our region believe that there was a disequilibrium. A disequilibrium created by the fall of Saddam Hussein, a disequilibrium created by the Arab Spring or the Islamic Awakening, however you want to call it, a disequilibrium created by the fall of the Taliban and the new government in Afghanistan. So they tried to sort of rebalance that disequilibrium because they believed in the zero-sum approach to this. But now we find ourselves in a negative-sum situation, in a lose-lose situation. Instability in Syria, instability in Iraq, instability in Afghanistan doesn't serve anybody. Actually, those who were one way or another culprit in this instability find themselves the first targets of this, as the unfortunate bombings last night showed. How can we go about doing this? We need to find the reality that we need stability in Syria. We can find stability in Syria by accepting that there won't be a military solution in Syria, by accepting that military victories have cycles. Today, one side has the upper hand, tomorrow it will be the other side. And if each side is looking for a military victory in order to come to the negotiating table, we will be fighting for eternity. Because there won't be any moment where both sides are feeling victorious, if we look at it from this zero-sum perspective. So we need to change our outlook. We need to know, understand, realize, and accept the reality that there won't be a military solution. There has to be a political solution. The political solution has to be acceptable to the Syrian people. People outside Syria can only facilitate Syrians reaching that solution, not dictate. We cannot dictate for the Syrian people. We cannot decide for the Syrian people who should govern and who should not govern them. But we can help the Syrian people to achieve a political framework in which they can be assured that the future of Syria will be decided by the Syrians themselves. I think all of us have a common interest. Now, Europe is facing this problem firsthand through the migration of these new wave of refugees, which is a crisis. We are used to this crisis. We are host to 2 million Afghan refugees. This year we had 350,000 illegal Afghan students going to our primary and secondary schools. So for us in Iran, it's not news to us. But it brought this issue to home for some of our European friends. Doesn't mean that Europe became interested in this issue only because of refugees. No, Germany was interested in this issue. I've discussed this with Frank Walter even before this became a problem. But now this issue has driven the problem home. It is in the interest of all of us to bring this humanitarian nightmare to an end, and we all need to realize that in bringing this humanitarian nightmare to an end, everybody needs to be flexible, as we all were flexible in resolving the nuclear issue. And everybody has to redefine the problem. The problem in Syria is a problem that needs to be redefined, and unless we are able to redefine this problem in a non-zero-sum mentality, in a different paradigm, then we will be able to resolve it only after we redefine the problem. Iran is ready to play its role in this process, and we will participate actively in any political solution to Syria, to Yemen, and to other hotspots in this region. Thank you.